It was a gray winter afternoon in Chicago. Snow drifted gently from the sky, softening the edges of the city. The streets were smeared with slush and tire tracks, and the wind cut through coats and scarves like it had a purpose. Jonah sat in the passenger seat of his mother's car, chin tucked into the collar of his hoodie, fingers tracing lines in the frost on the window. They had just finished her weekly grocery run, and Laura had stopped by McDonald's to grab dinner before heading into her night shift at the hospital. She looked tired, as usual, dark circles beneath her eyes, hair pulled back too tightly, her fingers tapping absently on the steering wheel as they waited in the drive-through line. Jonah wasn't hungry. He rarely was when it snowed. As they pulled around the corner and parked on the side of the building, his eyes landed on something odd, something still. At first, he thought it was a pile of black coats or trash bags pushed up against the wall near the entrance. But then it moved, barely, a shift in the snow. It was a dog, large, black, and silent. Its fur was wet and matted from the melting snow. No collar, no leash. It lay perfectly still, head resting on its front paws, body curled in tight against the wind. People walked past it without looking. A man in a suit glanced and turned his head. A woman pulled her child a little closer. Teenagers laughed nearby, tossing fries at each other, completely ignoring the unmoving shadow on the sidewalk. Jonah stared. Something about the dog held him. Not because it was homeless. Not even because it looked cold. But because it looked invisible. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you see it?" Laura was rummaging through the bag of food. "See what, Hon?" "That dog. Right there. By the door." She glanced up, distracted. "Oh, yeah. Poor thing. Let's go. Eat before it gets cold." Jonah didn't move. He kept looking at the dog. "No one's helping him." "I know," she said, her voice gentle but tired. "We can't take in every stray we see. Baby, I know." He reached into the bag, pulled out his hamburger, and opened the door. "Jonah? Hey, wait." But he was already walking. He stepped carefully across the icy sidewalk, holding the burger in two hands. As he approached, the dog didn't move, didn't lift its head. It just stared at the slush in front of it like it had already stopped expecting anything. Jonah knelt a few feet away. "I brought you this," he said. Still no movement. Then, very slowly, the dog's head turned. And it looked at him. Its eyes were golden, but dim, like light behind thick fog. Not wild, not desperate. Just tired. Jonah placed the burger on the ground, then slid it a little closer. The dog didn't lunge or sniff. Instead, it stared at him for a long, breathless moment, and something passed between them. Quiet, weightless. Then the dog, with great effort, lifted its head and took the burger in its mouth. Still staring at Jonah. "Hey," Laura's voice called from behind. She was standing beside the car now, holding her coat tighter around herself. "Let's go, sweetheart. It's freezing." Jonah didn't move. And then, for the first time, Laura truly looked at the dog. And she froze. Maybe it was the way it sat so still. Or the way it looked at her son. Not with fear. Not with instinct, but with sorrow. For just a second, she saw not an animal, but a soul. She blinked and stepped closer. He's so still. He was like that when we got here, Jonah said. No one even looked at him. Laura sighed, watching the snow melt on its back. He's not sick. He's just finished. Can we help him? Her heart ached at the question. She was a nurse. Helping was what she did. But bills stacked on the kitchen counter. And the apartment didn't allow pets. Still, something in her softened. She crouched beside Jonah, and together, they watched the silent dog chew slowly, thoughtfully, as if remembering what food was. After a moment, Laura reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a pair of latex gloves from work, and gently extended her hand toward the dog's head. He didn't flinch, didn't growl, just closed his eyes. She stroked his wet fur. He's freezing, she whispered. Jonah looked up at her. He's not a stray. He's just waiting for someone. Laura exhaled slowly. Maybe, she said, he was waiting for you. The drive home had been quiet. Jonah didn't speak after they left the McDonald's. He didn't touch the fries Laura offered. Didn't respond when she asked about school or if he wanted to watch a movie. He just sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring out the window as the snow swirled through the city lights. At home, he barely touched his dinner. His gaze kept drifting back to the front window, where the snow continued to fall. Slow and silent, street lights flickered outside, casting shadows on the thin layer of ice building along the sidewalk. Every few minutes, Jonah stood up and peered through the glass, as if hoping to see something he'd left behind. Laura watched him from the kitchen, stirring her tea, knowing that his mind hadn't returned with his body. He's still thinking about that dog, she whispered to herself. That night, as she got ready for her shift, she found Jonah sitting on the edge of his bed, already dressed in thick socks and a hoodie. His winter coat was folded neatly beside him, gloves tucked into the sleeves. She paused in the doorway. "You okay, baby?" He nodded, but didn't look up. "You're thinking about him." Another nod. She sat beside him and brushed his hair gently with her fingers. "I know it's hard, Jonah, but sometimes, strays just disappear. Sometimes they're already too tired to keep going." He wasn't, Jonah said softly. He was waiting. She didn't argue. She just pulled him into a hug and kissed his forehead. When she left for work, Jonah lay awake in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Outside, the snow kept falling. The next morning, before sunrise, Laura opened the apartment door to find Jonah already waiting outside. He stood next to her car in his winter coat, scarf wrapped up to his nose, a backpack slung over one shoulder. In his arms, he held a folded wool blanket. She blinked, startled, still in her scrubs. "You're up early." He nodded. "Can we go back?" She didn't ask where. She didn't have to. Laura sighed and looked at the time. She had 2 hours before her next shift started. "Yeah," she said, "let's go." The city was quieter than usual, muffled under fresh snow. The tires hissed against the slush as they pulled into the same parking spot near McDonald's. Jonah pressed his nose to the window, searching. Then he pointed. There. The dog was still there. Still curled in the same spot. Against the building wall, half covered in snow. He looked even more like a shadow now, his black fur dusted with white. Like frost on a forgotten coat. People walked past him again without looking. But Jonah saw him. He jumped out of the car, blanket in hand, and ran through the snow. Laura followed. Slower. Jonah knelt beside the dog. "Hey," he whispered. "It's me again." The dog didn't move, didn't lift his head, but his eyes opened, slowly, golden, still tired, still quiet, but no longer alone. "I'm gonna call you Max," Jonah said. "Okay." The name seemed to settle into the air, like it had always belonged to him. He unfolded the blanket and, slowly, gently, wrapped it around the dog's thin body. The dog didn't resist, didn't flinch. He let Jonah cover him, as if he'd been waiting for warmth, for a name, for someone to say, "I see you." Laura crouched beside them and touched Max's side. "He's freezing. He's not shaking," Jonah said. "That's not good, right?" "No, it's not." She looked at the old building across the street. "There's a vet near here. I think they open in 30 minutes. We can wait," Jonah said quickly. Laura looked down at Max, who now lay motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. He didn't try to move, to run, or even to pull away. He just blinked once and let his head rest on Jonah's knee. "Okay," she said softly, "let's get him help." They carried Max in the back seat, wrapped in the blanket, his head resting on Jonah's lap the whole way. Jonah didn't speak, he just stroked Max's ears, watching the frost melt from his fur. When they arrived, the vet staff helped bring him inside. There were no growls, no flinching. Max didn't resist the leash or the strange room or the smell of antiseptic. He just looked around, then closed his eyes. Dr. Ramirez, the head vet, examined him carefully. "He's malnourished," she said. "Older, maybe 7, 8 years. No microchip, no ID, frostbite on the ears and pads. But we can treat it." "Will he be okay?" Jonah asked. Dr. Ramirez smiled gently. "He didn't fight us. That's rare. Most strays panic. But this one, he came in like he knew we were waiting for him too." Jonah glanced at Laura. "He was waiting for us," he whispered. Laura put her arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. And Max, lying still on the exam table, let out a quiet exhale. Like relief. Like the end of a long winter. Like hope. Max spent 3 nights at the veterinary clinic, curled in a soft kennel under warm blankets, receiving fluids and small meals every few hours. He had been severely dehydrated, underweight, and suffering from mild hypothermia. The pads of his paws were cracked and raw. His ribs showed beneath his soot-black fur like shadows pressed from the inside. But he was alive. And slowly, very slowly, he began to heal. Jonah visited him every day after school. He brought books and sat cross-legged on the clinic floor outside the kennel, reading aloud even when Max seemed too tired to care. "He listens," Jonah told the vet tech one day. "He's just quiet inside." When Dr. Ramirez finally said Max could go home, Laura hesitated. They stood by the counter as the vet handed her the final paperwork, listing Max's dietary plan, medications, and follow-up dates. Jonah clutched the leash tightly in both hands. "Jonah," Laura started. He looked up, already knowing the tone. "I know we can't really afford a dog," he said, voice soft. "I know it's not easy." She nodded. "It's not just the money. It's everything. Time, space, responsibility. I'll take care of him," Jonah said. "I promise. I'll feed him, walk him, clean up everything. I'll even do more chores." Laura looked down at the dog, thin, silent, standing beside Jonah like a ghost stitched to his side. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't bark. He just waited. "What if someone's looking for him?" she said. Jonah's grip tightened slightly. "No one is." He was waiting in the snow. All that time. If someone was looking, they'd have come. Laura didn't answer. Then Jonah said something else, something so quiet it almost vanished between them. "We didn't find Max. Max found us." And with that, Laura gave a long, tired sigh, the kind she usually gave after double shifts and cold showers, and nodded. "Okay," she said. "He comes home." The apartment wasn't big, a two-bedroom space with old radiators, peeling paint in the corners, and a second-hand couch that dipped in the middle. But Jonah cleared a corner in the living room for Max, a blanket, a water bowl, and a beat-up stuffed rabbit from his own toy shelf. Max never barked, never whined. He simply moved where Jonah moved. When Jonah sat down to do homework, Max lay at his feet, head resting on Jonah's socked toes. When Jonah walked to the kitchen, Max followed and curled up just outside the door. And at night, when Jonah slept, Max would lie in front of his door, quiet and still as shadow. He didn't play. He didn't chew or chase or roll. He just existed, close, constant, breathing in rhythm with the boy who brought him back. Laura wasn't used to animals in the house. She found fur on her work pants, water spills on the floor, small messes near the front mat when Jonah forgot to take Max out on time. She didn't say much at first, just cleaned up with a sigh and rubbed her temples. But she noticed the change in Jonah. He talked more, he laughed more, quietly at first. Then more freely. He stopped staring out the window every night, waiting for her headlights to appear. Instead, he read books again, drew comics, played music on the old keyboard in the corner. Max would sit nearby, always listening, even when Laura came home late from night shifts, face pale, fingers numb from 12 hours on her feet. She'd find Max waiting near the door and Jonah already asleep, curled peacefully with a small smile on his face. One morning, just before sunrise, Laura sat on the couch with a cup of reheated coffee, too tired to sleep, too wired to eat. Max was across the room, staring out the window. She watched him for a long time. Then she whispered, more to herself than to him, "Thank you." Max didn't turn, didn't move, but she saw his ears twitch, just slightly, as if he understood. Weeks passed. Jonah began brushing Max's coat in the mornings before school, humming under his breath. He saved bits of meat from dinner, mixing them into Max's food. He even took over walking him before bed, no matter how cold the air got. And Max began to change too. Little by little, his coat grew shinier, his walk steadier. Still no barks, still no wagging tail. But sometimes, when Jonah sat on the floor reading or Laura laughed at something he said, Max would close his eyes and rest his head on Jonah's knee, his whole body softening. He was not the same dog they'd found in the snow. He was someone who had made space in their home without needing noise, tricks, or games. Just presence, just breath. One Friday night, Laura came home early. She opened the door and found Jonah asleep on the couch, math book open on his chest. Max was beside him, head resting gently on Jonah's arm. Their bodies curled into each other like matched puzzle pieces. Laura stood there for a moment, keys still in her hand, snow melting on her coat. And she smiled. Their apartment was still small, their lives still busy, but now, there was space, a quiet, steady space, a place to breathe. And in that space, they were not just two people surviving winter. They were three hearts learning to heal. It started like any other afternoon. The sky was pale and still, the kind of cold that seeped under jackets and tugged at fingertips. Jonah was in the backyard, kicking a worn soccer ball against the wooden fence. Max lying nearby in the winter grass, watching. Silent as always. He didn't chase the ball. He never did. He just kept his golden eyes on Jonah. As if that was enough. Laura had left the back gate unlatched after bringing in groceries. The wind, stronger than usual, creaked it open inch by inch. Jonah didn't notice. Not until he turned to make another pass and Max was gone. At first, he didn't panic. Max sometimes wandered a little, toward the porch or the corner of the fence. But when Jonah called once, then twice, and heard no shuffle of paws on snow, no quiet huff in reply, his chest went tight. He ran to the gate. It was wide open. "Max!" he shouted, stepping out onto the alley behind the house. "Max!" Nothing. No tracks. No sound. Just wind curling through the old bricks, tugging at his sleeves. Laura dropped her bag the moment she heard. Together, they searched the neighborhood, up and down the block, behind garages, under porches. They asked every neighbor. Jonah clutched the most recent photo he had, Max curled on the couch with his head on a blanket, and showed it to anyone who answered the door. No one had seen him. As night fell, the wind picked up, snow began to fall again, light at first, then heavier, swirling into the streets and coating every clue they hadn't found in time. Jonah's voice cracked from calling. Laura's cheeks were red from the cold. Her gloves soaked through. Still, they searched. That night, Jonah didn't sleep. He sat by the window until dawn, wrapped in Max's blanket, his eyes locked on the gate. Laura brought him tea, rubbed his shoulders, and said quietly, "We'll find him," but her voice trembled. The next day, Jonah made flyers. Lost dog, black, quiet, friendly. Answers to Max. Last seen, backyard, Elm Street. Please call. He taped him to trees. Bus stops. cafe windows. He handed him to strangers walking dogs and workers shoveling snow. He posted online. 2. Forums. Neighborhood apps. Anything. Still, nothing. The snowstorm worsened. Visibility dropped. The streets emptied. Jonah stood alone on the corner, holding a soggy stack of flyers, his boots buried in slush. He didn't cry. He just looked every direction, waiting for a shape, a shadow, a sign. On the second morning, the phone rang. Laura answered, her voice hoarse. Jonah sat up from the couch instantly. Alert. "Hello?" she said. A pause. Then, "Wait. Slow down. Where?" She cupped the receiver. "Jonah? It's Lily, the girl who sells lemonade on weekends. She says there's a black dog lying outside the old bakery downtown." Jonah was already grabbing his coat. He sprinted the entire way. Through the snow, down streets barely plowed, across intersections blurred with frost. His lungs burned. His scarf unraveled behind him. He didn't stop, and when he turned the final corner, breath sharp in his throat, he saw it. The bakery had been closed for years. Its windows boarded, sign half fallen, but on the snow-slick sidewalk in front of it, curled tightly like a statue carved from shadow, was Max. He was lying exactly as Jonah remembered from that first day, head resting on paws. Eyes barely open, body still and silent. But this time, he lifted his head before Jonah even called his name. This time, he was waiting, not for anyone, for Jonah. Jonah dropped to his knees in the snow, tears burning hot down his face. "Max," he breathed. Max didn't run, didn't bark. He just stood slowly, walked forward, and pressed his head into Jonah's chest. Like no time had passed at all. Jonah hugged him tightly, face buried in his fur. "You came back," he whispered. "You always knew where to go." Max didn't answer. He didn't need to. In that moment, the snow didn't matter, the wind didn't bite, the cold couldn't reach them. Because Max hadn't disappeared. He had returned. To where he had always waited. Back to the one who saw him first. The collar was navy blue, with a small, polished tag that shimmered when the light hit it. Jonah picked it out himself. He traced his finger over the letters again and again before handing it to the clerk behind the counter. Max. Found. Chosen. Loved. 3 words. 3 truths. That week, they made it official. Max was no longer just a stray with sad eyes and a silent presence. He was family. Jonah stood beside Laura at the adoption office, his hands pressed to the desk, his smile the widest it had been in months. Even the clerk, usually brisk and routine, paused to grin as Max sat quietly at their feet, tail sweeping across the tiled floor. When they got home, Jonah clipped the collar around Max's neck with careful hands. Max didn't resist. He looked up at Jonah with those familiar golden eyes. And then did something he'd never done before. He licked Jonah's cheek. "Guess that's a yes," Laura said, laughing softly. From that moment on, Max changed. Not all at once. Not like a switch flipping, but gradually. Like ice thawing after a long winter. He started lifting his head when Jonah entered the room. He began to follow with more energy, a lightness in his step. One evening, Jonah bounced a basketball across the apartment floor, just to see what would happen. Max looked up, tail twitching, then he let out a single, soft bark. It was quiet, almost hesitant, but it was the first sound Jonah had ever heard from him. Jonah froze, then laughed, so full and loud that Laura came rushing in from the kitchen. He barked. Jonah said, eyes wide. Max barked. From then on, Max responded when called. He stood by the door when it was time for walks. He pressed his head into Laura's side when she came home from her night shifts, as if telling her, "You're home now." I kept it warm. One rainy Wednesday, Jonah's English teacher gave the class a writing assignment. What does family mean to you? Most students wrote about brothers, sisters, weekend dinners, holiday traditions. Jonah stayed quiet while they read theirs aloud. When it was his turn, he walked slowly to the front of the class, unfolded his notebook, and said simply, "My family found me when I didn't know I was lost." There was a pause. Then he began reading. Family isn't just who you live with. It's not who shares your name or even who brings you home. Family is who waits for you when you're gone, who sees you when no one else looks, who doesn't give up even when you don't have a voice left to call out. My dog Max didn't bark when we met. He didn't run to me. He waited, on the street, in the snow, and later, at the window when I came home from school. He waited like someone who already knew who I was. And when he disappeared, I realized, he wasn't just a dog. He was the part of our family we didn't know we were missing. Family isn't who you find. It's who waits for you. The classroom was silent when Jonah finished. Later that night, he placed the essay on the kitchen table without a word. Laura read it after her shift, still wearing her scrubs, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. Tears welled in her eyes before she even reached the last line. The next day, she printed it, framed it in a simple black frame, and hung it by the front door, so that every time someone left or returned, they'd see it, so that Jonah would always remember what he wrote, and why it mattered. Winter passed slowly into spring. The snow melted from the windowsills. The sidewalks turned from gray slush to wet concrete, and tulips began to peek through the fences near the old bakery. Max remained calm, quiet, watchful, but not silent anymore. On lazy afternoons, he'd lie with his head on Jonah's lap while the boy read out loud. On warmer mornings, he'd sit beside Laura while she sipped her coffee, their silent companionship filling the kitchen more than any conversation could. And every evening, like clockwork, Max climbed onto the small cushioned bench under the living room window. He'd press his chin to the windowsill, stare out at the fading street, watching the world go by with steady, gentle eyes. He no longer looked like a shadow, not the forgotten figure outside a fast food restaurant, not a stray curled up in the snow, unseen and unwanted. Now, he was something else entirely. A presence, a warmth, the light of a small home that had made room for him. Jonah would glance over sometimes, while doing homework or brushing his teeth, and smile to himself. Max never asked for much, just a place to wait. a place to be seen. And now, finally, he had won, found, chosen, loved, forever.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.